And good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Global Path to Rebound Summit. I'm Scott Hamilton, your host. We welcome you all from Southern California, University of California, Irvine, Beal Applied Innovation. So my role is to quickly get us into this morning. We have a very fast-paced but robust and insightful agenda. And again, thank you for joining us. Let me just give you a little background here of what our organization is about. This is north of 65,000 people have attended our forums and events and workshops across the planet over the past several years, past 11 years. And the whole objective here is to look at emerging trends. Secondly, this is an organization where we put together the key C-suite enterprise leaders, director level and above, together to look at what is emerging, what are new potential strategic transformations, what are new policies, practices, and others that are going on. We develop what we call next practices, and I'll get into that in just a moment. If you're getting a little bit of background noise from our end, by the way, we're coming to you live from our Applied Innovation Center, and they decided to do a fire drill just now. So a little bit of excitement here while we're trying to make this introduction. At any rate, the organization is all about next practices. That is, what is coming next? What will move us beyond the status quo? And the fundamental issue of bringing C-suite leaders and others from across the globe, from across different industry sectors together, is this idea that innovation will come not from your own home industry necessarily, but that by exposing you to different ideas from different sectors and different functional areas, we can broaden our sphere of knowledge and improve the quality of our innovation and ideas. In other words, by joining these kind of meetings and forming collaborative networks, you can get beyond your own domain. This is what we used to look like just a few months ago. In-room sessions of 100 to 1,000 people. We hope to get back to this. But in the meantime, these virtual events have been very effective at reaching you and connecting you with this global audience. Today, we're just delighted to have this terrific lineup of speakers from across the globe that will contribute their ideas of how you can grow and innovate in these difficult times. I really want to do a shout out to our New York program team, Susan, Sylvia, Melanie, for helping us put together just a stellar lineup in a short period of time. Again, this was executed in less than 4 weeks to pull together this kind of elaborate program so that we get this information to you on a timely basis. I think you'll agree with me, this is going to be extremely an extraordinary session for you to learn from. I also want to thank our sponsors. Without these folks, we cannot do these kinds of things. Thank you, Sterling. Thank you, SRG Advisory. Fragment, our long-term friend. Thank you so much, Robert, your team. The Miller Farm Media folks. Intrepid Relocation, who has been our solid partner now for many years in New York. And of course, our NextWorks family of businesses. Thank you again for sponsoring us and supporting this extraordinary event. All right, where are we? Well, these are extraordinary times. And we're looking to continue what Dr. King had in mind in terms of his dream. We feel like we're on the cusp of making real change now. And so when you look at this period of time where we have multiple crises, it's also a time for ultimate opportunity, again, to reach those dreams that we have all had. So it's a time of multiple crises, financial, social, but it's the kind of change that is, again, necessary and provides us with an opportunity to move forward. So let me kind of put a point on this. McKinsey just did a study that was released. It's a continuing study, just released just a few weeks ago, less than 2 weeks ago. This information came to us. 90% of CEOs feel like the current crisis will fundamentally change the way they do business. 85% are concerned that the crisis will have an impact on their customer needs. 21%, however, feel that they're not ready for this and that they're concerned about their expertise, resource, and readiness to get through this. 2/3 believe this will be the most challenging point in their entire executive career. 2/3 believe that. 3/4 of executives, however, believe that this crisis creates significant areas for growth. And again, that's what I was talking about. It may be a crisis, but this is an opportunity for personal growth, social growth, business growth. And again, if we look at it from that standpoint, I think there's a tremendous opportunity there. The steps forward from here are to learn how to adapt, how to identify these new opportunities or these next practices that will take you past the status quo. We need to be reevaluating everything we do from an innovative standpoint and then build a foundation from here that will take us through this period of time. So let's get started. Use the Q&A function that's on your Zoom screen or the chat feature. Start your questions now, feed them to us, and we'll get to as many of those questions as we can during the course of the session. Again, if you go online, the speaker bios and agenda are there for today. We're not going to do elaborate introductions because you have the bios in front of you. And again, the agenda is online as well. Finally, we can't see you at your workstation. So if you're eating lunch, that's great. Get relaxed, enjoy, take notes, participate in this session. And again, we'll have a good time and also get some useful information out of this short summit. So with that, let's get started. I want to welcome Mike Brannigan and Melanie to the session. Melanie, I'm going to turn it to you to introduce Mike. And again, welcome both of you.
Thank you so much, Scott, and good morning, everyone. It is my honor and privilege to introduce Mike Brannigan, CEO and President of the Sudeth Companies. Mike oversees the executive leadership, strategic direction, and overall growth and sustainability, profitability of the Sudeth Companies. Mike is known for his engaging leadership style and commitment to hard work, teamwork, and customer service. And under his leadership, Sudeth has grown tremendously across several diverse business units. Prior to joining Sudeth, Mike served as Chief Financial Officer for IGPS. He spent 17 years in various financial and operational leadership positions at Ryder, at Procter & Gamble, at Arthur & Andersen. He holds an MBA from Cornell University and a degree from Albright College. So Mike, thank you so much for joining me today. It's great to have you with us.
Yes. Good morning, Melanie. Good morning, everybody. Pleasure to be here. And thanks for making me sound more accomplished than I really am. So I appreciate that introduction.
You definitely are. But you and I, and in the company, we've had, prior to COVID, there was a lot of talk about technology, right? It's the hot button right now and the changing of the client and customer experience. So what were the key elements that you were focused on prior to this?
Great question. The customer experience is such a commonly used phrase in the business community today. And rightfully so. So we have been focused on the customer experience as a core part of our overall business strategy. A few points of elaboration that I wanted to get into this morning. First, our strategy really centers around what we call the intersection of people, technology, and services. What I mean by that is across our portfolio of businesses, we offer a broad range of services to our clients. In fact, in our Sterling Lexicon Relocation Company, there are 97 distinct services that we offer for our clients. Those services are delivered by a professional team with significant experience in the industry, who understands the complexities of the operating environment and who have the knowledge and experience for us to deliver for our clients, at least from a traditional service perspective. So for our focus, and a lot of that, I was thinking about Scott's opening comments there, a lot of this was driven by the disruptors in coming into the industry, the so-called disruptors forcing us to rethink about our business. So we had to shift our focus to introduce technology to create a more robust digital experience to complement our traditional service offering, right? Our business is really a personal business, so a one-size solution doesn't fit and doesn't work for everybody. So we really need to optimize that intersection of people, technology, and services to be present for our clients, responsive, and transparent across a spectrum of digital and physical solutions. We felt that if we disrupted ourselves with that depth of service delivery expertise, that depth of knowledge across our company, integrating the technology to that and optimizing that intersection would be a strategic advantage. So that was one focus area. Another component is defining who is the customer. So, of course, our customers include our corporate mobility clients, and I see that Jack and from Stryker, who are on the panel, are our clients, and that's a critical piece, as are their transferees. So it's a core focus area for us. But in our context of the customer experience, we also view our employees and our supply chain as our customers when thinking about the customer experience. If we can make it easier for our employees and our supply chain to do business with us, and we can have a seamless, integrated experience leveraging technology, integrated communication, and so forth, then in turn, it will be easier for our clients and their transferees to do business with us, which is going to result in a better customer experience for everyone in our customer group. So from a technology perspective, then what we were focused pre-COVID-19 was on developing what we call our I-Core technology framework. And that's really building the core operating platforms and an overall ecosystem that enables us to then integrate technologies that we'll either self-develop or purchase, sort of best-of-breed approach, to enhance the experiences for those various customer segments. From there, we focused on developing and integrating our global technology platforms that are required to seamlessly run our businesses globally on these common platforms. That's the foundation. Then the next phase is going to be optimizing those unique experiences of those primary customer constituents. So corporate clients and the mobility departments, their transferees, and our supply chain through various portals and digital interfaces that allow each group to consume their experience with our company in the most effective way. So still very much a work in process, but that was our focus prior to the onset here of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Makes sense. So now that COVID has affected us, how has COVID affected your timeline and development of this technology? Has your focus changed?
Actually, if anything, and maybe somewhat paradoxically, we've accelerated our development. And that's been challenging. I don't think it's going to be a surprise to anyone on this call that our business has been significantly impacted in the short term by COVID-19, like many other businesses. Relocations and moving activity are down dramatically domestically, and even more so internationally. So we, like most companies, have had to be responsive to that and adjust our business and our staffing levels and so forth to the current levels of volume and revenue that we're experiencing. So to continue to invest in, and not pull back on your technology spending or your technology staffing, or in some cases even doubling down, can be tough for some to understand. But if we really buy into and believe in this whole idea of optimizing the intersection of people, technology, and services, and recognizing that integrating the technology piece that is critical, we cannot lose time on this race to achieve that optimization of the intersection of people, technology, and services. And we've had to keep our foot on the accelerator, so to speak, even during this pandemic. Our plan was and remains to deploy significant components of our newly branded and developing platform by the end of the first quarter of 2021. So fortunately, we're in a position with our ownership structure and the commitments that we have that we're in this for the long term. Our ownership and board have been supportive of the strategy, even while we try to steer the company through this unprecedented global pandemic.
Interesting. So as a CEO of a large multinational corporation, how are you adapting your 5-year plan to the next normal, as they're calling it? What strategies are you or have you developed to create a strategic edge?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I tell you, one probably many of my peers will spend some time thinking about it. Heck, it's hard for us at this point to do a 2-week forecast. But at the same time, we've got to think about a 5-year plan. And I do like this term next normal, as opposed to you hear some people talking about the new normal. Businesses continue to evolve and change naturally over time. In some cases, they're forced to change in response to these periodic shocks or black swan events like this COVID-19 global pandemic. So in that context, it's always about what's next and not what's new. The world's always moving forward. So I like the what's next. So each of our business units and our company collectively are using what we refer to as an ARROW framework. And that means ARROW, an ARROW framework, to really think through the next normal and the evolution of the strategy in response to this pandemic. So the A and the first R in that ARROW are really behind us and dealt with. The A was assessing the impacts of this global pandemic and addressing an incredibly rapid deceleration of business that we were seeing as the global economy effectively grinded to a halt back in March. And then implementing our resiliency plans, that first R, to ensure that we had business continuity and that we could fully enable a remote workforce, much like everybody else. To link it back more specifically to your question, then, it's the ROW and ARROW is how we are thinking and planning for the next normal. So that first or that second R is really reimagining the way the world moves, which is our vision statement, and that means we have to leverage what we learned during this crisis to change how we position the company post-crisis. And there's really multiple layers to this strategy. What's encouraging for us is that we're already seeing and starting to see that our customers are engaging with us on these very same issues and working on their own strategic initiatives of how are they going to reimagine the way their organizations operate. The O is about operationalizing our return to work strategies internally and for our clients, right? Because we're a supply chain business. We manage a lot of a diverse supply chain to be able to execute for our clients. So how are we ramping up and scaling our capabilities and how are we helping to ensure that we have a stable supply chain capable of scaling and ramping to support our clients as they come back online? And that's not uniform across all of our business. And then the last but not least is how do we win together? Which it probably is fundamental to your question because it's all about our understanding our changing customer needs and market shifts for the next normal as the world adjusts to operating in a post-COVID-19 world. Clearly things will be different, at least for the foreseeable future. So, and I liked Scott's opening McKinsey stats there because I think a lot of that reflects probably the way that I feel and many of my peers feel. So, interestingly enough, as we're working through this ARROW process, it's reaffirming that at a high level, our overall strategy, this idea of optimizing the intersection of people, technology, and services is in fact the right strategy for the next normal. We're going to have to accelerate our technology and digital journey and keep our foot on the accelerator, like I mentioned earlier. As part of the experience, the employee experience of that customer experience, that includes accelerating the development of the platforms and integrated communications because we really have to be more effective in empowering our employees to support our clients. And when I think about what's happened over the last 90 days, which seems like a lifetime, by the way, we created a remote workforce out of necessity. Now we're circling back to how do we rethink the workforce strategically and structurally. By that, I mean we still believe in a strong office core. And we believe that the death of the office environment is somewhat exaggerated. We believe that collaboration and innovation and culture matter. And they are created in part by having a strong office core. But at the same time, we also understand we need to create more flexibility for our employees and enable remote work as a structural component of how we deliver services so that we can create that customer experience that is so critical that we discussed earlier. So that's really a pull forward of our Workforce 2025 initiative that's critical as we work. I'm driving my chief people officer a little crazy right now on how are we going to make sure we advance that employee experience and think about that very strategically as a core component of the overall customer experience. So I think in a nutshell, this change, particularly caused by this type of severe externality, does create opportunity for those with a long-term horizon, with a strong vision, with a strong strategy, and who are willing to make the investments necessary to support what is a fundamentally changing business environment. So Not everyone in our industry is going to be able to make that change or really have the resources to survive and be stronger. But we feel very fortunate we're in a position to be one of those companies that, one of that 75% that Scott mentioned in the McKinsey study, who feel like that we're going to weather the storm and we're going to be well positioned to invest and grow on the other side of this crisis.
Interesting. Do you have any last minute advice for the HR leaders on the call as they're dealing with CEOs in the industry and in their company?
Yeah, outside of being patient with us because we're a different breed, as probably most of you know. I think if anything, the role of HR has become even more challenging for all this. I mentioned our Workforce 2025 initiative. It's something that we've been focused on, really this whole employee experience and really understanding in a world where work has changed. Our ability to work has changed. The expectations of our employees in terms of how they want to work and how they want to consume that experience with us has changed. So from an HR perspective, making sure that that's tightly integration and the needs of the employee, that the employee as customer philosophy and helping navigate what is really a changing work environment. The role of the HR leader, the chief people leader, I think is going to become even more critical and more integrated to the overall strategy as we think through how we're going to be there for our customers and how we deliver that employee and customer experience in the future. So I think this is a tremendous opportunity for HR leaders to help people like myself and my peers really think through that and how we need to deal with our work teams and integrate them and offer them more solutions and different types of solutions going forward.
Interesting. Scott, back to you. Do we have any questions? Or
Yeah, we do. A couple of questions here, Mike. What do you think that a good customer experience means for the client receiving it? This is one of our viewers' questions. What do you think is a good customer experience? What does a good customer experience mean for the client receiving it?
Yeah. I think I could probably take up the rest of your show on that, but we distill down to a very simple phrase. We want to be the easiest company to do business with, right? And that means from a customer perspective, that can be experienced a number of different ways, right? But this whole idea of seamless communication, seamless integration, availability of information to be able to allow them to execute what they need to execute without having to chase us down. So just in that whole context of being easy to do business with, us anticipating their needs and making that information or whatever happens to be available to them in a real-time basis is part of what makes up a good customer experience. But that can take on many, many forms. That could be a whole separate topic of discussion here, Scott.
Yeah, and again, this is part of a series, so that's again one of those things we'll do a deep dive on. And we got time for one more quick question here, Mike. Thanks from Ben, our friend Ben Heller of Price Point. His question is peak season. This is a mobility related question, obviously. Peak season is very different this year. What are you anticipating in the next few months and the next normal related to moving behavior and volume of business?
Yeah, that's another very good question, and I wish I had that crystal ball. So, we have a very diverse set of businesses across our company. So we service military service members, we serve corporate clients, and we serve residential private shipper business. So I would say very quickly on the military side, we're going to move a lot of people in a very short period of time because the military, it's mission critical they move, and that's starting to ramp up now, and we're going to be extremely busy handling that through the balance of the year. Different story on the corporate side. We've seen some uptick in some volumes. Whereas once upon a time we may have been down 40 to 50% in volume. Now we're maybe seeing that's down 10 or 20% on volume. I don't think we'll get back to prior year levels. I think there's some pent up demand. We'll see a bit of a spike here as people get more comfortable moving their employees, and I think we'll settle it down somewhere below that. So we're not forecasting a significant recovery of volumes this year domestically. internationally, where the picture is more uncertain because you still have restrictions on cross-border mobility, quarantine requirements, that'll be even more significant. So when my board asks me, I say, we'll talk about international in 2021, because I do think that's a little bit slower ramp up and we'll see it delayed a little further. So I do believe the next normal, at least intermediate term, is going to be below what a normalized run rate would be while people try to figure this out.
Oh, that's great. Mike, again, thanks for your comments. This was a great, terrific opening to this session. And I want to turn it over now to Robert Horsley to kind of help us look at this next normal in terms of how do we reimagine it. Again, Mike, thanks so much. By the way, for our viewers, at the top of your screen, you can look at this either via a gallery view or speaker view. So if you just want to see the speakers, just click on speaker view. Robert, welcome. Again, Robert and Fragment have been a long-term supporter of the Executive Next Practice Institute. He's executive director of Fragment for over 20 years. And again, I asked Robert to join us for his insights about where do we head from here. Welcome, Robert. Let's see, Robert, I think you're muted. There we go. Perfect.
Wow, I said such good things just then. I was actually just asking, is it possible to share? Is that possible? It says I'm disabled. Well,
yes, I'm going to make you the host. If you'll turn it back to me afterward, I'm going to make you the host so you can share.
Fantastic. Well, let me do that. I do have... If I can get to it here.
Again, while Robert's pulling up his slides, as an attendee, you can look at this via the gallery or speaker view. Probably better speaker view at the top. Usually shows up at the top right-hand corner of your screen. So you can see just the speaker that's on. All right. Thanks, Robert.
Look at that. Well, listen, we used to think we knew what disruption meant before all this, and then we're handed a real disruption, right? I get the question all the time, when are we going to return to work? In fact, I don't know that we're ever going to return to work like we are. So we're challenging everybody kind of in our world to rethink about all this, to reimagine. Like there is no longer a place that you call work. In fact, we as a partnership, I mean, this is what's crazy. We come together as a partnership at Fragment every day at 5 o'clock Eastern. To get together to talk about what's new. I mean, this is just a quick half hour to stay current and talk about being connected. We laugh. We can't wait to go back to the office so we don't have to see each other every day. But I guess I would invite everybody to think a little bit more like that. I do live in California, and I've gotten to spend, for the first time in my life, a lot of time here. And it's kind of reinvigorated me in a way. And some of the organizations that I'm surrounded with here are really embracing this. I don't know if that is good for traditional mobility, but I do think that it gives a lot of opportunity. You've all heard that Jack Dorsey, who basically runs both Twitter and Squares, and invited his employees to work forever, wherever they want to work. Shopify, Upwork, Facebook, Mark came out, about 3 weeks ago now, and said he's going to try to build a structure out where he expects over 50% of the workforce to work from home. Google has said everybody can work from home for at least into the new year. So this is, while it's disruption and deal with it while you can, I think it really provides opportunity. So I've started to call it business as unusual, to not look at whether it's the new normal or wherever it's at, it's going to be unusual to us. And I think that starts to embrace kind of the tone that it will take people a little bit of getting used to. So I'm asked all the time, like, okay, so what does that mean? My wife is a therapist and an executive coach who is constantly thinking about well, what is it? How do people get comfortable with all this now? And she and I go on hikes, and we end up talking about this for the first time. But when I'm starting to think about it, is just open your mind to what else? How can this look really different? Not just in the traditional approaches. And I don't think we're going back to what was. So I think a good example is when you get invited to a wedding now, or a bar mitzvah, or any kind of event. I think that the response card is going to look a little bit differently. I think you might not be able to attend at all, but you're going to get the choice. Are you going to attend there physically, or will you attend virtually? Because we're getting good at that. We're getting good at this. I would submit that, Scott, these your forums will return physically in some ways, but there will also be an opportunity to constantly attend virtually and to be able to get more quickly out of things. I think I've attended a couple virtual weddings, and it's great. I feel like I didn't have to invest my entire self getting to another part of the country for a long period of time, but I wanted to be able to participate, and that made it much simpler. I think restaurants are another one, right? That we know they've just been hit hard. Well, some of them have been hit hard. Others started pulling back and thinking about what they were all about. What do they deliver? Well, they all think about food and making sure people have the food that they like. But what they were really doing in most successful restaurants, it was about the experience. It was about the experience that they were delivering. So naturally, then they started, we've got this favorite Italian restaurant that's not too far away that we used to frequent all the time, and a really innovative chef. He started thinking about, okay, so I'm going to start delivering that experience that people used to get in the restaurant. So he started taking different parts of Italy and delivering an experience that, on specific days of the food from that region, the wine from that region, and some other trinket from that region that they would deliver. So not, in the past, he was limited to, I think, 40 tables. He turned them twice a day, 80 customers. Now, from that same area, he had a great brand, a great reputation, but now he's delivering over 400 meals a day. So he's taken his business and said, okay, yes, it's sad that we can't all be there, and there will always be that desire to get together, but I'm gonna open myself up and now deliver those experiences to a much wider audience. And his business is actually, now this is unique, I think, but his business is actually doing better from a revenue standpoint than it was previously. And all he did was just kind of relook at what he was actually delivering. So it does take a reinvestment to do this. And again, at Fragment, this is something we're thinking about all the time, and thinking about, okay, in order to be successful in this new world, in this business as unusual time, maybe we need to kind of reassess what the important elements are. And I just heard Mike say part of this, right? Digitization is a big part of this. And how are we going to make that work? Right now, I spend my day on Zoom. And while it's very intentional, everything that I do, and I think it's quite effective, it's working, I think, because of a level of trust that I built over years of seeing people and interacting with people and having meals with people and like, so trust is a key component to making this work. Connectivity, Mike, you were talking about that. What are you doing digitally to make sure you can keep people connected? And what are you doing from a transparency standpoint? That's a key to the whole thing. People want to be able to see that just because they're working from wherever, they can still see everything that's going on. So these are kind of three of the key pillars that we're thinking about, and I think anybody needs to think about when they start reimagining it. Now, clearly, when people got frustrated with the whole right at the beginning, I'm just reminded of them. And there's nothing that's really happened that wasn't going to happen in the next several years. It just compressed it, right? I think we were leading towards working more digitally, working more at home, having tools that pulled us all together. So really, at Fragment, it sounds like at Sudeth and a lot of other companies, it's really pushed that investment to go much more quickly. We may have spread that out over a number of years, but now we can't do it quick enough. In fact, we had one of our offices that had kind of an older phone system where it was really difficult to have people work remotely. But even during this, they were able to go to the cloud and all of a sudden connect their email, connect their Slack channel, connect their Zoom and their phone all in one place. And they were able to do that within 2 days. That is how fast you can kind of get reoriented into the world. So from my perspective, we have to be ready from a mobility perspective, mobility to see things differently. So radical flexibility for sure. So if we go back and really look at what drove or what drives mobility, and this isn't changing, right? Talent acquisition, and especially from an immigration standpoint within the mobility kind of ecosystem, talent acquisition was clearly one of the biggest drivers. When you needed to find the right person with the right skills to be in the right place, you may have needed to hire them. Talent development, clearly the strategy that's longest been associated with mobility. How do you keep people growing them? How do you start delivering, talent deployment? You clearly needed to get people places to deliver things. And what became, probably the most sexy thing in the last few years has been the business traveler. From my perspective, I don't know how much that will change. When it will return, it's kind of hard to know. But what we do know is that, and Mike, you said this, that what's the pent-up demand? I know out here in California, the pent-up demand is a thing. People aren't hiring people as fast as they were because they don't think that the onboarding experience has been, can be what it is or what it was to get them culturally aligned, or that maybe even the best people are in the market. But they are figuring that out. Companies that used to have everybody come to the office on the first day or the first week to associate them with the organization, I'm told that they're not going back to that, right? They've figured out kind of a new way to do it. So I think that the curve will come back up very quickly. The leaders that I've talked to say that assignments, that nobody's really saying they don't want to go on the assignment they were set to go on. So the demand is still there. How quickly they can get comfortable, hard to know. But it seems to be, at least in the last month, that's kind of accelerating as well. I think the business traveler will be kind of the slowest to come back. I don't think anybody will disagree with that. That said, I think that will kind of expand the short-term assignee. People that are very intentionally have to be somewhere to do something for an organization. It may not be, in something they were doing just kind of from time to time. They were going for a week and coming back, going for a week and coming back. Now I think there'll be people placed in those positions for a good 6 months and so they have the capability. So I think that will drive, to a certain extent, mobility, a little bit of increase in mobility. So if this was the funnel, right, what is it we did really well? Well, we helped people figure out who the right people were to be in a mobility program. We were, or are, very good at getting them there. Probably most importantly, we were good and are good at making them comfortable and productive, and then motivate them and get them back, right? Those are our core, attributes, the core things that we are really good at. So if we hold on to that and remember that we think that mobility is a tremendous lever for diversity, something that clearly everybody is focused on now, and this is a clear driver for that, and that this can give people the experiences they want. So if you really look to reinvent it, I would look for opportunity to say, okay, well, maybe mobility is not going to just be for people moving across a border. Maybe there's this whole virtual workforce. I mean, they're mobile by definition, right? So what's our role in that, right? It seems to me that it mimics what we were saying we were good at. Figuring out, is this a job that's appropriate to be done remotely? Can the person and is the person, can they be effective doing this? Maybe, the example I'm constantly, faced with is the lab environment. Can you be effective in something where you had to collaborate kind of in the lab environment? Is that something you should be able to do remotely? That it remains to be seen, but that's something we can help put a framework together for people to evaluate. My favorite, of course, is compliant. Can this job be done compliantly? And that's not just with international borders, but it's also, looking at taxation, and it's looking at all kinds of issues that privacy and security, and can you do that job compliantly? And finally, are they being successful? So there's a huge role for mobility. It's a little bit different than moving people and getting people places, but if we start thinking about the tools that we have that accomplish a lot of this, how are we going to get our supply chain to think about some of those things? And because a lot of the mobility leaders I talk with are thinking about how do I move myself a little bit more into that space, right? And a big part of that is being able to map people to talent availability, right? So what do you all think are the skills of the future workplace? When if you step back, and again, my whole goal is just to kind of have you think about things a little bit differently. People with kids all the time. So what does this mean? My kids shouldn't go get a computer science degree? What should they be doing? Well, I mean, I would tell you, I think if I look at and I think, okay, people, when you hire them now, when I hire people, they've got to be great communicators, because you're going to have to try harder. You're going to have to be much more intentional about that. You're going to have multiple sets of skills. You can't just do your one thing and expect to plug into the ecosystem that way. You're going to have to be able to have your specialty, the thing you're a great expert at, but you're going to have to be good at a number of things to be able to collaborate and communicate with your group. So what tools do we have to do that? When we're just like Mike is saying, we're out developing other tools. What are we doing to make sure that our people can be successful in that and helping them collaborate? Oh. So I won't try to keep going on anymore, but I would really invite you to not think about going back to the office just means, realigning the office, making sure people are a little further apart, but to really think about how you could do this differently and where we play in this space. So I promise, Scott, I wouldn't go on and on. I get very hyped up about this whole thing, but thank you for the opportunity. I hope and would love to get together with people to talk a little bit more about reimagining this.
Yeah, Robert, that's a terrific opening, and thanks for helping us set the stage here. And you are exactly right. We're going to be talking more often via the fact that we have this virtual environment now. So stick with us, and if you'll turn the hosting back to me, and I'll bring on Alice Korngold and her corporate panel. Again, Robert, thanks so much for setting the stage for us. Alice, I'm going to let you take it away. Folks have your bio here, and Alice has been nice enough to join us and support us on several sessions, and so we're looking forward to your comments. Welcome, Alice, and your team.
Thank you so much. You can hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes, great. Okay, thank you so much. And Scott, thank you for having us. Susan Ginsberg, thank you for making this possible. Scott, your opening remarks were just so perfect, and Mike and Robert, it just fits beautifully. So as we know, we're at a time of tremendous dislocation and disruption. We're dealing with existential threats, from climate change to pandemics, and perhaps most ubiquitous and fundamental of all, racial inequity and racial injustice. What it means, just as Scott and Mike and Robert positioned it, these tremendous challenges also present us with an extraordinary, unique opportunity for companies, for NGOs, for all of us to help build back better and create real and systemic change so that economies thrive, but that people thrive, people from all backgrounds. So I love the word pivot, and it's been amazing to watch different organizations handle the pivot. One organization, I know the CEO with her senior team, they burned the strategic plan at the beginning of March and started over, and they're doing a brilliant pivot. So it's very exciting to see how creative, productive, effective, high impact organizations can be. From a business perspective, advancing diversity and inclusion is an imperative in a number of ways, including, and I'm going to ask Scott, please, for the first slide.
All right, just one moment, and we'll get you there.
And while Scott's getting that, I loved how you talked, Scott, about personal growth, social growth, and business growth. This is where we have a real opportunity now. And the first slide, I'll tell you about.
Keep going, and I'll get to you in just a moment.
Which is that there is abundant evidence that companies, organizations that have diverse and inclusive leadership and boards, this results in higher profits, larger market shares, and faster rates of innovation. The sources are from Harvard Business School, Stanford Business School, MSCI, great writers like Pamela Newkirk and Scott Page, McKinsey studies. So we know this. And as some of the earlier speakers said, this disruption has caused many of us to accelerate our planning and changes that to address the current challenges, but also capture opportunities to make tremendous improvements and advancements. And I think the virtual world also allows a lot of opportunity for greater inclusivity as well in many ways. So, okay, so that's the first slide. And in the, so companies with greater diversity yield valuable results, including higher profits, larger market shares, and faster rates of innovation. And if I could have the next slide, please, what I'm going to talk about is there are many ways to accomplish the kinds of changes and improvements that we're talking about. But one way that our organization focuses on with many multinational corporations and global and regional nonprofits is nonprofit board service. So we've trained and matched over 1,000 business people to nonprofit boards, global, national, and regional. And for the past 3 years, with the encouragement and support of multinational corporations, we've conducted studies to look at what are the benefits to companies, their employees, nonprofits, and communities. And lo and behold, what we saw from thousands of survey results and dozens of interviews is that when business people serve on nonprofit boards, they're serving with board members who have different backgrounds than their own, coming together for a mission that they're passionate about with important work to do. And 81% serve organizations with clients who have different backgrounds than their own. And Scott, I'll take the next slide, please. What we've seen as a result is that employees who serve on nonprofit boards, they develop greater empathy, we have data on that, but also greater appreciation for the perspectives of people from different backgrounds. That we learned in one of our early studies, and the next year some of the companies said, well, that's great, but do they actually change their behavior back at work? And in fact, the majority listen more carefully to different views when they're back at work, create more inclusive committees and teams, and make more inclusive hiring and promotion decisions. Next slide, please. So we also looked at the demographics of employees who were not serving on boards but would be interested compared to those who do serve. And what we found is that 32% of employees from diverse racial and ethnic backgrounds are interested in serving, but only 17% have had the opportunity to do so. So this is a great opportunity to advance and develop outstanding employees. And just to tell you from personal experience, in the past 2 or 3 weeks, the companies that we're working with have made the extra effort to identify Black and Latinx employees for nonprofit boards. And they are some of the most extraordinary people I've ever worked with. And I thought, where have they been hiding you? So here they are. And nonprofit boards want these folks, and companies, now these folks are positioned for advancement. Next slide, next and last slide, please, Scott. And what we find is that for all people who serve on nonprofit boards, they develop as better leaders, more confident, accepting more responsibility, feeling more useful, and positioned for advancement and promotion. And thank you, Scott. I'm done with that. So thank you. So So this is one way, but I think the lessons are that we develop these understandings from experience, not by being trained and told to appreciate different backgrounds, but from working with people from different backgrounds in really positive situations. I'd like to introduce, and just a final comment is that the board service and other ways of partnering businesses and nonprofits are extremely powerful in advancing solutions to social, environmental, economic challenges. I have two amazing panelists. We'll be brief, and then Scott has questions for us. The first, it looks like, is Gabby coming on first? Okay, Gabby's coming on first because I see you on the screen. And Gabby Burien is the Senior Director of Sustainable Food Systems at Bayer. She moved to St. Louis from Brazil 7 years ago with her young children. So she has experienced what it means, the kind of dislocation we're talking about, and very successfully for her and her family. And she's an esteemed leader at her company and in communities worldwide. So I will turn it over to Gabby, and then we'll hear from Grady Crosby. Thank you, Gabby.
Thank you, Alice. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much. And this has been awesome. I love very much everything so far. Then one piece, and Alice mentioned the main point in my life has been, in fact, moving to the United States 7 years ago. And of course, moving is never easy, right? This kind of accent, the way I talk, the way I hug, I used to hug, everything is different. The way you live is different. And I have been now relearning with my kids how Americans normally do. No, mom, too much hug is not normal here. And all this is challenge, but at the same time brings opportunities because I can see things that normally people around me are seeing differently. Then when I arrived here 7 years ago, it was really odd, starting with the fact that I want to discuss climate change, and there was people asking if I was Democrat, and I was nothing. I was just trying to discuss science and action. Then when you start to realize how weak you can be if you are out of your comfort zone, is when you see the need you have to connect and collaborate. And then because you really need to connect, you really need to collaborate, you start to join your community, join other opportunities, and bring your perspective and start to learn how to make your voice matter, even talking about with having a different way to talk, a different accent. Then moving for a person is hard. Imagine moving forward for a society, right? Then the period that we are now is really, and we all have been facing, what are the differences? And everyone has been mentioned already, everything that we needed to do in order to move forward, in order to move to the next normal. I love this. I also agree. It's a normal, in fact. What we need, again, is the same way when we as a people, we move and we need diverse perspective and we need to collaborate. It's the same as society, right? We need diverse perspective. We need collaboration. But the good part and the awesome part, in fact, in my opinion, is we all can be leaders now. The moment that we are living now is a moment that there is no rules. Then if I have a big social media, that's a little bit my case, I have a good social media, then you have a power. You have a power that's totally unrelated to your hierarchy. It's a power that people start to respect. And these start to change the game, because then you can start to drive in a different way. Then leadership, collaborations are very important for each one of us to survive, but we will need also to rethink. And yes, I agree with what Robert said, reimagine what we want, because we can do it happen. This is the best moment in our life, I would say, to stand up and to say, yes, diversity matters. We need to rethink the world and we need to come back different. Then Over to you, Alice, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Gabby. Thank you. And now I'll call on Grady Crosby, who's Vice President for Public Relations at Johnson Controls. He's Chief Diversity Officer, and he's President of the Johnson Controls Foundation, and also a highly esteemed business and community leader. Please join us, Grady. Oh, mute.
Hear me?
Now we can. Thank you. Perfect.
Okay, fantastic. All of the presenters today have done such a great job, and so I've just really thoroughly enjoyed being here. And thank you for the opportunity of being here. So at Johnson Controls, I lead all of our sustainability and diversity, whether it's workforce or supplier diversity, as well as community involvement and engagement type of activity. So I'm squarely in that mode of what corporate citizenship is all about. And we know that corporate citizenship is also about building culture within our company as well. And lo and behold, even in the space of corporate citizenship and culture building, we're innovating at the same time in the midst of, what's been going on with the health crisis, in the midst of what's been going on with the economic crisis, as well as the call to attention to racial injustice and inequities. We're continuing to innovate. And so the question is, so how do you innovate in the space? Well, it's interesting because corporate citizenship or corporate social responsibility is not really an old discipline in and of itself. And so we're still evolving, but in the midst of evolving, we are innovating. And one of the ways we do that in this time is to really listen more, to make sure we're listening and keeping our head up about the things that are going on all around us. And we really believe that the true spirit of innovation is not necessarily coming up with something brand new, if you will, but leveraging that which is existing in either new ways or making new applications to be able to get to some results. So one of the things we do in this space, it allows us to turn our attention back to our company values. And we believe all those things we've done to build equity within our company through our values within the walls of our company, continue to do that on the outside of our company as well. So how does that look? So we listened when organizations we were supporting were running out of food with regard to the COVID-19 health crisis and the economic crisis that ensued. And as we were shuttering or moving people to remote work statuses, the cafeterias that we had and stocked with food and things of that nature, we end up diverting that into neighborhoods that we supported. And you may ask, well, how were you able to even see or do that? And the reason is all behind what Alice talked about when she opened up in terms of board service. A lot of companies have been coming out and talking about, commitments they're making to organizations and things of that nature. And certainly it's great to be able to stroke a check with a lot of zeros in front of a decimal point. But consider this, we really believe that as a corporate citizen, one of the greatest gifts that you can give to your community is your people and the talent and expertise that they bring to any given situation. And we know through the study Alice talked about how it will improve their acumen towards D&I, how it will improve their acumen towards innovation, because some of these social service organizations that we support just have missions that are just too critical to fail. And we know that people want to come to a job not just to make a paycheck, but they really want to make a difference. So we use board service and our people to add extra eyes and hands to our entire philanthropic strategy so we can better set our strategies in the community. And it ends up connecting our people to these communities. And having a system already set up like that is something that we can use to attract talent, to add to the employee experience that others have talked about, and really to use as a vehicle to retain talent and have that talent even have more loyalty to Johnson Controls by the way that we support them and their causes and their time and their treasure in the community. So I'll stop right there and make sure we have enough time for questions.
Thank you. I'll make a final comment and then turn it over to Scott. But I love working with both Brady and Gabby and a wonderful team of leaders. And I have to tell you, in the past 2 or 3 weeks, we've had more outreach from companies than ever before, saying we need to get our people involved on boards because it's seen as stakeholder engagement, listening, understanding what the challenges are in the community, and being engaged productively. So talk about a moment of opportunity. I've never seen anything like it. So it's very thrilling. Thank you, Gabby and Grady. And Scott, back to you.
Excellent job. Just a terrific panel. I'm going to have you all stay on if you can, and we're going to continue to move on and take additional questions because we will have a session at the very end where we can take questions as well. But just terrific comments, very timely based on what we're experiencing now. Thank you so much for that. I want to move on now to Sylvia and Kenneth to join us, and let's go a little different direction. Let's talk a little bit about digital transformation and technology in general and the role it's playing. Welcome, Kenneth Goodwin and Sylvia Ehrlich.
Hey, good morning.
Hi. Good morning. Well, talk about technology. As the panel, the illustrious panel before was speaking, my computer decided to update itself. So I had to quickly panic and get my Surface and switch over. So that I could be on, because that was a little bit of in 10 minutes ago. It was great. But what I heard of the panel was fabulous. What I'd like to do, because we have a limited time here, and Kenneth and I have had many conversations, and they can go on at length. They're so fascinating and also mind-blowing. I'd like to just, as we've been hearing everybody say, everybody's talked about technology and how important technology is, and we've all been talking about it. We've all been moving or creeping slowly into it. But now with what's happened worldwide, there's been quite a different exponential jump, shall we say. And there's so much going on in this world. And what I've asked Kenneth to do is address it in three pillars in the window of time that we have. So he's going to address the future state of living challenges, work challenges, and then the global paths to rebound solutions. With that, I'd like to pass it on to our most distinguished expert on digital transformation, big data, information technology, and risk management.
Sylvia, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. And I'm glad that we were able to solve the issue with the computer using technology, which is very important. But you brought up a good point with big data. I like to start off with the future state of living. One of the things I've learned in speaking to experts around the world, also investing in companies, big data is the new gold. And you and I spoke about that a lot, Sylvia, how big data is, yes, it's very frightening. But the notion nowadays is that we as human beings are considered to be a central source of data. So the key here in terms of future state of living is that each individual is its own source of information. It's going to change the way that we live our lives in terms of how we live at home and work and so forth. But going back at living at home, one of the big things that has been a trend is in terms of the use of Zoom and the use of social media, but mainly Zoom. We have an over-reliance on that, as you can see already. We're using a lot more frequently, and part of that is that we're not going to the offices as much. So we're spending more time at home, and we're spending more time in front of these computers and everything else. Now, what that does is that actually, in a sense, it brings on a challenge in terms of cybersecurity and fraud. So the idea that now that you are actually using computers, using applications, and using a lot of data, it gives more access to your information, your systems, and so forth. Another area that we're seeing a big increase in is edutech. Many people still need to be trained. And one of the conversations that we were having with several of the panelists is talking about retaining colleagues, retaining employees, and so forth. But edutech is very key. Being able to be trained, being able to learn, being able to stay abreast of news and your subject matter expertise. That is being done more, Sylvia, via the application. So now our mobile phones are now becoming to be a source where we're actually using that as a way to get more information and get trained. Now, the challenge with that, again, it goes back to data privacy, data integrity, and everything else,
Right.
GDPR.
That was a big question I had, is the GDPR, and where does that all go?
Exactly, GDPR as well as CA. So that's one of the things. Now, here's what's happening now. That's a great question. You and I had this conversation. A lot of these algorithms and applications are done through artificial intelligence. And with AI, machine learning, but mainly looking at in terms of reasoning and third wave AI, what it has done is made it more cognitive. And in that sense, you and I become a data center, data sources. So it actually has a level of predictability, and it has a level of looking forward in terms of you looking at you and I as centers of information. So it's like the wheel and spoke kind of approach. You and I are both kind of wheels, and our outreach, our particular individuals that we're connected to are considered to be spokes, but it's all sources of data. And that leads into urban tech, which is what's really happening now in terms of what we're doing in terms of our living, how we go into parks, how we driving our cars, those things of that nature, how we actually ordering at restaurants and shops. All of those things are done via the mobile application. But it's also being done through what we call, and you and I spoke about this again, Sylvia, about location intelligence. The ability to use, right, that's right. That's an eye opener, right? The ability to use satellite technology to kind of follow us and track and trace us throughout, our lives in terms of where we're living at. And that's what central cities are doing in terms of smart cities around the world. The unique thing that's happening now is that Wuhan, China, is a designated smart city. So,
in a brief synopsis.
Yes, what's unique about Wuhan is it is a designated smart city. So it's a city known for testing new technology. The new technology that was launched in Wuhan, China, was 5G. So the 5G phones that we all want to have and use, the first place that it was actually launched was in Wuhan, China. So it's a place where it's known for research and development. It's a place that's known for applications and algorithms. And that's the unique thing about Wuhan. So when you look at COVID-19 and everything else, you got to kind of put that relationship together between 5G technology and COVID-19. But that's mainly in terms of the state of living. Now, state of work, it's unique because we're all at home today. So we're not really in our offices. So when you look at the structures of the offices have changed somewhat. So when we go back to work, we're not going to be crowding in the elevators, right, Sylvia? We're going to be pretty much 6 feet apart, social distancing. Now, buildings in New York City has basically been built on crowding the elevators. So the new technology that has been used is trying to find a way to, one, use your card keys a lot less, being able to be informed as to how many people are in the elevators, making sure that there is social distancing. It's going to be curious to see how these offices will look like. We may go back to a cubicle form, which before we moved away from that to the kind of an open air kind of offices. So there's got to be a way where we protect each other, but also technology is going to be used in terms of testing each other going into the offices. So before we get to the offices, we're going to be tested to see whether or not we have high fever and everything else. And that's going to be all centralized in terms of the data that's going to be used.
Is that going to be AI driven as well and detected?
I would bet to believe more so on the machine learning side, being able to take all that data, all that information, being able to have analytics, being able to track and trace individuals throughout the buildings. That will be driven by artificial intelligence, a mixture of artificial intelligence and cloud computing, where cloud computing is going to be a place where we can store that information.
Now that works in countries like China, Wuhan, and places like that. But in countries like the United States, where there's the individual and personal freedoms, and in countries like in the European nations where privacy is of utmost importance, how do you see that happening?
Yeah, that's the biggest challenge. That's a great question, Sylvia. As a former regulator from the Federal Reserve System, the first question I always ask is consumer protection, right? That's huge from the regulatory standpoint, prudential regulators here in the U.S. That's a challenge. Technology will find a way to kind of resolve it, maybe with the sense of a new app or a new algorithm that's kind of probably put us on a platform, I would say, using potentially blockchain technology, distributed ledger technology, where each member would have to agree on one particular type of protocol. And once you agree to that, you agree to say, hey, my data is now available to you. You and I could be on a distributed ledger technology, but we agreed to this protocol. That could be one way. Many firms are starting to look at this and apply it. One of the areas that is being applied, Sylvia, is supply chain. One of the biggest challenges that we have with COVID-19 in the state of work, in the state of living, is that our supply chain has been impacted tremendously. So firms like ABM InBev and Pfizer and LVMH, these firms have huge supply chains around the world, and they rely on data and they rely on information. So blockchain technology could be probably the solution to that.
Okay, so when moving towards the Rebound solutions, that's one of them. What else do you see?
Well, blockchain, but also artificial intelligence, if used correctly. And I say that with an air of there's ethics in this. There's definitely, it's an ethical portion to this. AI, if it's used with a sense that is able to assist us as human beings from a data analytical standpoint, machine learning, working together with distributed ledger technology, with cloud computing, could work if it's worked together on a particular platform. So I think that's one solution. Another solution could be just from a standpoint, better regulations. We're going to have to be much more vigilant in terms of learning new technologies and changing our regulations to meet them. Smart cities actually work well in terms of big data, using that big data for the good of people and not using it to try to take advantage of individuals.
Yeah, there was just something on the news today in New York City because they're using the police department is using facial recognition, and there's a whole brouhaha about that right now as well. So I'm going to ask you, because we don't have a lot of time left, what gets you most excited in this world that you live in and I'm trying to figure out, and what makes it difficult for you to sleep at night?
The most exciting thing is the innovation in technology. I mean, we're moving very fast, almost to the point, I would almost say we're moving too fast. COVID-19, these recent events have actually moved digital transformation a lot faster in terms of what is being produced. From artificial intelligence.
That is moving too fast?
Yes, I think we're moving a little too fast. That actually keeps me up at night because of the fact that we're moving too fast, and it's causing us to get involved with cybersecurity and fraud. There's a large amount of cybersecurity. As you digitize your platform more, your cybersecurity risk and your fraud risk increases because now you're exposing your data to the public, and that could be an issue.
And how does that get help? Is there a solution for that?
Is there a solution? I would say the best thing for us to realize is that we would have to, one thing that AI does is that AI is supposed to be assistant for human beings. But as human beings, we naturally default to having empathy and sympathy. Those are the things that you can't teach a machine. And I think that kind of reasoning.
We have something left that we can provide.
Yes, we have something left. That's exactly it. We have something left that we can offer. That hasn't changed, and that won't change. So I think that we have to be able to maintain that.
Thank you, Kenneth. Scott, we're trying to keep you on track. We're staying at our 10 minutes. Is there anything else? There's an old vaudevillian saying that says, keep them wanting more. And I think we'd love to hear a lot more.
That's right. No, that's so true. And Kenneth, I could listen to you all day long. You're always such great insights to what's happening. I look forward to having you back very soon. Thanks for setting the stage there. And Sylvia, a terrific job.
We need to do a deep dive in this because Kenneth and I have never had less than an hour and a half, 2 hour conversation.
I know, right?
Exactly.
Thank you very much for having us. Kenneth, thanks so much for sharing your wisdom with us. And back to you.
Thanks much. All right,
Thank
I'm
you.
going to bring on, thanks again, Ken and Sylvia. I'm going to bring on Lee Miner, please. Lee, if you can join us, and we'll get you unmuted.
Hi there.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Well, Lee, we'll have a brief but important conversation here. Just a little bit of background. Lee is Senior Vice President and Chief Human Resources Officer for Vents. And Vents is a contemporary fashion brand established in 2002. They're sold worldwide, including over 2,500 locations across 44 countries and 62 retail stores, and their own e-commerce site. Now, talk about an organization that's in the middle of all this. So Vince, let's just start with that. Give us some background. What are you up against right now?
Thank you, Scott. Well, first, I just want to thank you for including me on this. I guess I'm the token Chief People Officer, and I so appreciate Mike's earlier reference to the role that HR plays these days, and never thought it would be at this level. But right now, I think our industry, probably along with food and beverage, as Robert also mentioned, is going through a really, really tough challenge. We had to furlough 75% of our entire population because we closed our retail stores. And our brands, we also operate two other contemporary brands, Rebecca Taylor and Parker. They're also sold in high-end specialty stores and department stores. And again, they've been closed. So our major source of revenue worldwide has been affected by this. And thankfully, e-commerce has maintained and we've been able to ship out our product, but still, it's not the same. People still enjoy shopping. They enjoy trying on clothing. It's a social experience with friends and family. And we felt the pangs of people wanting to get back into stores. It's also been hard to do this and figure out how to do it in a safe way and bring people back, especially for stores that are located in malls or large shopping centers.
And tell us a little bit more now. You've got some major milestones coming up, some key decisions coming up into the fall. What's it look like for you? What are the things that are confronting?
A lot of it is going to be, there is a timestamp when you furlough a group of people and you have to make a decision at the end of that. Are you going to be able to bring them back, or do you have to make it more permanent and talk about layoffs? A lot of it is going to depend on our customers and their appetite to come back and shop from us. So we're really tied to the business results, understanding what's happening. I'm happy to say in the past 2 weeks, 3 weeks, we've been able to start reopening stores very methodically, making sure it's a safe environment for the employees. But the tragic events that have gone on with social injustice threw another wrench in what we were doing, and we had to close our stores again. So our ability to figure out what's going on is going to be up to the customer and the consumer and telling us their appetite to have our product, wear our product, and shop again and feel comfortable doing it.
Yeah, it's such an interesting comment. Many of the CHROs, the people in your seat, are telling us the same thing, that it's a day-to-day strategy. They're having to react and be as proactive as they can against what's going on, although they are still optimistic about what will go forward. As you look at the retail environment, from your perspective, you've gone certainly virtual in many respects. How much of that will remain permanent, and how much will transition back to the physical type environment?
Well, that's a really great question, because we talk about this a lot. And, my brand is unique in and of itself in that we are already a split corporate location. All of our product design work, merchandising work is done out in LA, and a lot of the commercial side of the business is in New York. So we've been on our own working virtually when you have your corporation split already. It's been amazing, some of the innovations we've seen, being able to develop product virtually where groups have not been able to work with fit models, technicians, understand how fit is going to be on a product, and then producing a line and being able to sell it to customers virtually. So clothing is very unique. You want to touch it, you want to feel it, you want to see the way it fits. While virtual is great, it's different than the three-dimensional ability to really touch that product and see the way that product falls on an individual. So for us, it's very important that we get certain teams back together, working together, those teams that really work on product. We think the integrity of product is what makes companies successful. And in order to really allow them to work on that product, we have to get those folks back together. And in stores, we definitely want to be able to have that client experience and see that we're able to service people for what they need. One of the successes in retail is being able to take a return and convert it into another sale. And you do that when you really build trust with someone and you can get them into your store. So, but at the same time, we've had to pivot to working virtually, reaching out to consumers, showing them on iPads, iPhones, whatever technology they have. These are the products we have. Even having clienteling specialists, go through the website with customers and showing them and helping them buy online. So not even directing them to do it on their own, but working with them to do it.
No, that's a terrific approach and a way to transition back to some type of next normal for retail. Mike started off by talking about the customer and what they were doing with the customer experience and centricity. What is your feeling among your team about how the customer will come back in terms of their comfort level of getting into that touch environment again? What's your forecast there in terms of how they'll come back?
We found it to be extremely individual. People, it's their comfort level in going back out as things start to open up. What are people's comfort level in going to an outdoor restaurant, being served? Is there a comfort in being exposed? We've done a really good job in putting protocols in place for all the locations we're reopening in stores, including not only providing our employees the essential PPE needs, but also making it thoughtful for the customer. So if you're trying out a product and you decide not to take that product goes back of house and we steam it. We wait 24 hours before we put it back in. We make sure that there aren't too many garments on the floor. We keep a lot more back of house so that we can limit the amount that people are touching and feeling. So there's not that much exposure and hopefully people feel comfortable with that. It's presented its own share of challenges because we have found that some stores have come back faster than we even would have imagined, which is great for business. But as more customers try on product and more product comes off the floor, you find yourself all of a sudden with having too much product in the back and not up front for your customers to see. So it's required us to pivot and it's required us to use technology where possible to show people what's happening and to also rely on other stores to help if we don't have the product in one store, then to work with another store to show it virtually.
Yeah. Well, that's, again, just great comments. Just one final question before we get to our corporate panel, Lee. Sylvia asked Kenneth what was keeping him up at night, and I can see 24 things that are keeping you up, but is there one particular thing that's really at top of mind for you right now?
Probably two things, but related to one another. I'm all about how you have equality across the board for your associates. And while my organization may be small, our associates are engaged in so many different areas of the country, different countries. And how do you get equality when some people are not comfortable using public transportation to get to work where others can drive, asking people to physically be in the store where corporate people may have the ability to work virtually. And is that fair? So that's really, that balance of equality is the thing that I think is the hardest for HR leaders to tackle right now, especially how do you continue to have equality across your organization when there may be different models, individual models that work for people.
Yeah, it's certainly, again, as we start out the show today, that is one of our key considerations. And again, we appreciate your comments and perspectives on this, Lee. I want to have you back because, again, we could do an entire session on this together. And thank you for your perspectives. Stick around as long as you can, and we'll get to some more questions from the audience here in a moment. I want to turn it now to our friend Susan Ginsberg for our corporate panel. Welcome, Susan and panel. Susan, I'll let you move forward with it. And again, thank you again for joining us today.
Great, and thank you, Scott. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So thank you, Scott. Great job, panelists, as I reflect on the wonderful words and wisdom that I heard earlier today. I take away 3 comments: adapt, pivot, reimagine. And think about a saying that I often told my children, now grown adults, and it comes down to getting comfortable being uncomfortable. As we emerge from the prolonged stay-at-home conditions worldwide, we really want to understand, and we're going to understand now from our 3 fantastic panelists, how organizations are crafting their short-term steps and their longer-term strategies, supporting their talent, fulfilling their workforce needs, and achieving business goals in the midst of multiple challenges. So first, I'd like to turn it over to Sarah DeHaze when I ask the question of what short-term steps are being considered and implemented by your organization to revitalize and rebound.
Well, thank you, Susan, and hello, everybody. Very excited to be here with you all. I think we had a couple of immediate goals within the organization. The first, and I think understandably primary, was the health and safety of our workforce. So from the outset of the pandemic, really a lot of that in a global mobility sense involved bringing employees to a location, sometimes to be reunited with family, where they were likely going to spend the duration of the quarantine and wait out travel restrictions, quite honestly. So global mobility was heavily involved in that process, assessing and sort of articulating the practical requirements around, those different travel plans and any compliance risks associated. I think that remains. I would say the second goal on a short-term basis was the absolute focus on our client relationships and servicing those client needs. So one way I think that we did this, or we answered this, was by accelerating a global platform that we have, and we accelerated the rollout of that. It's driven by AI, and it's a communications platform we call Marcel internally, that allowed us to fill our immediate resource needs around the world. It doesn't matter where they might be. We essentially are able to staff a lot of short-term projects, what we call gigs, as well as longer-term roles. And so I think that has really helped us handpick talent, that will be the best fit for the purpose involved. We also push out a lot of the COVID-19 related content on that platform, so that everybody can have the latest and greatest on the health and safety guidelines. I think when you look at the longer term, it strikes me when we, in that conversation with Lee, we are not in a post-COVID world, right? So we're all sort of having to manage through the fact that the virus is not solved. And in many cases, you solve the virus, the customer will return, the economy will rebound in many ways. So I think it is harder on the long-term planning front because really none of us know what that is going to exactly look like. But I think it's fair to say we're not going back to a pre-COVID world.
Absolutely. I think we're agreeing that the next normal is the way to look, and really understanding the knowns, but we also have, like you said, Sarah, a lot of unknowns. So now Jack Gempel from Stryker would love to hear your perspective.
Great, thanks, Susan. And very much like Sarah and like most companies, our short-term goals are first and foremost the health and safety of the employees. And as things are now slowly beginning to open, the short-term strategy is for careful return to the office, again, keeping in mind the employees at the forefront. And during COVID, the business did slow down significantly, but really never stopped. Our sales folks were in the operating rooms during COVID, assisting surgeons on emergency surgeries as they normally do as part of their job. And the company was involved in developing various PPE equipment and other products to support what was going on with COVID. Now, the non-emergency procedures were postponed, and that very much impacted the business results. These postponed surgeries are just now slowly starting back up, and for the short term are being decided on a case-by-case basis and depending on where and what state. So as business begins to increase, also manufacturing we're starting to see on the increase under very strict COVID guidelines. And although the short-term goals are being addressed day by day, the company remains committed to manage also the longer-term goals to get back to the new norm. And the real question, though, is what is defined as the length of a short term or the long term? And it's impossible to determine that period because it goes without saying that all dependent on what COVID will look like a month from now or 6 months from now or a year from now or even longer than a year. So I believe most companies are going to find it a challenge to accurately predict their short and long-term goals. And COVID will continue to remain in that driver's seat and will determine the duration of the rebound as to the length of that. You're on mute. Susan, you're on mute.
Thank you so much, Jack. And Cheryl, would love to hear your perspective as well as we wrap up our first question.
Thanks, Susan. Thanks, everybody, for the opportunity. The comments so far throughout the commencement of this session has been really rewarding, and it's interesting to see that we're all collectively on the same wavelength, so I think we're all headed in the right direction. And certainly to echo Sarah and Jack's point, I think anywhere from now through to maybe rest of the year, if not through to 2024, organizations are fundamentally making ambiguity operational. And I think that's probably just the feasible approach given the many dependencies we have on the global ecosystem. So we've all seen the limitations on domestic and international mobility, and I think we have yet to really quantify the cost consequences, certainly from a tax or immigration lens, given the things that we've had to make do with as we evolve through this pandemic or operate. So I think as we continue to do that, we also have to take a step back and measure the impact and how likely these operational fixes, for lack of a better phrase, can become core to our company's DNA or philosophy. And I think the success of those will determine whether we're able to rebound or not. So if I think of two quick examples, you talk about the learnings from your tax and immigration lens in this new way forward. How will that impact companies and where they choose to have a global footprint? When you think of global data protocols, cybersecurity, the access to bandwidth, and how we have a unique privilege of having the ability to have access to Wi-Fi. That isn't the reality in some regions. So I think we have to be sensitive to that and what that means for remote working conditions. And certainly, as Jack alluded to, the health and safety protocols will impact how successfully we stress test the system and get back into a normal way of operating.
Fantastic. Thank you, Cheryl. So the common theme through all of your comments, again, is flexing, pivoting, adaptability. So moving on to our next question, how is your organization reimagining, thinking back to what Robert Horsley said earlier, reimagining your longer-term strategic talent management in your markets and the future of work in your organization? Jack?
Well, I see the future of relocation activity from a more positive slant and where the glass is being half full rather than half empty. And I believe that we'll eventually return back to relocating employees at the rate we were at pre-COVID, and that work from home will not destroy the mobility industry, as many of you are saying. Well, because of COVID, relocation activity, understandably, it continues to be low for now, a lot much less than prior to COVID. However, once we get through this and the companies begin to recover economically and hiring is on the rise, we should see relocation activity spike. The work from home strategies will not take over most industries. I know that there's a lot of talk about work from home becoming the new norm because it was so successful, and then the fear that it will negatively impact relocation activity. Although work from home has appeared to have been largely successful for the past few months, I have to ask, was it really successful? Do companies really know enough to make work from home long-term decisions on this? From someone who works from home as I do feel that the work from home success we are hearing is misleading. We couldn't leave our homes, so what else to do but work 10 to 12 hours a day? And yes, that made us feel extremely productive. But does that amount of time working equate to productivity? Well, at best, companies will need to do extensive research on the impact of large number of employees working from home, taking into account their culture, managing talent, performance, as well as their own economics, to name just a few things. And then employees have to ask themselves, do they really want to work from home full time? What I do predict is talent retention strategy is allowing more part-time flexible workforce arrangements, like commuting 3 days to the office and then 2 days working from home. But let me leave you with this regarding working from home. People are all different, but fundamentally, human beings are social animals and need a certain amount of human interaction to keep us mentally healthy. Working from home on large scales would for sure have its challenges to this. You're on mute.
Thank you, Jack. And in your closing statement, I'm thinking about what Gabriella Burian said earlier, that she misses hugs. So the virtual connection is great. And some of us need to step out a little bit more, and we're going to do that, I'm sure, with caution and steadfastness. So let's move on to Cheryl to hear her perspective.
So this was, it was a feel question for me, this one. So I had to take a bit of introspection when you asked this of us, Susan. And I think the top two issues, definitely the social injustice and COVID hitting us, it's asking us to rethink as humans how we show up. At least that's how it's surfacing up for me. And I think right now there is collectively a level of trust that has been eroded from the top down, bottom up in how we see ourselves as part of the greater picture. So I think to reimagine the future, it is about understanding that we need to rebuild trust and we need to rebuild behaviors. And as we go again, testing how this system works, because we're all equally at the same playing field right now, starting from ground zero, because nobody knows what this looks like. We all have inherent models that we've practiced, but fundamentally, I think we need to reshift what that looks like. So when I think about talent attraction, and certainly from a mobility perspective, one of the questions I think I want us to start asking is, how, now that we've moved to a fully distributed, in some respects, workforce, how are you going to be incenting somebody to mobilize? How are you making that experience unique for them? And what are your drivers for mobility? How are you asking the why question or answering the why question to the employee that says, here's how I'm going to make you feel safe when you move? So I think there's a shift from a culture perspective, an organization perspective, because now you're having to take the needs of the employee in a much more unique way to build that strategic and sustainable model that you need going forward. And I think as a subset, then you're going to start looking at competency frameworks as it relates to remote working conditions, and that just layers on top of things. But the fundamental issue for me is trust.
And thank you for that, Cheryl. Again, your theme of building trust, in some cases rebuilding trust, is really very individual and organization specific. But trust is really what will ensure that organizations operate in a safe and create a safe environment, as Lee and others earlier today talked about, really to be productive, to be effective, and to coalesce in whatever means works for you and your organization. So on to Sarah. Thank you.
No, thank you. That's interesting. I was thinking about it, how overnight, right, we were all basically told to take a timeout, and we suddenly had 80,000, home offices sort of up and running overnight practically. And I think along the lines of what Cheryl just mentioned, this has been a marvelous opportunity for us to take a really hard look at what works and what doesn't work. Even hearkening back to what Robert was saying, this is a marvelous opportunity. And if we don't take the moment to learn the lessons from it, then it's really been squandered. I thought it might be interesting to share a little bit around some steps we took internally at Publicis. We actually launched some surveys across our employee population. And as those are coming in, it's been fascinating to see some of the results. Obviously, the employees were happy not to be commuting, no surprise. They're finding their hours much longer, like Jack mentioned, and it's harder and harder to turn off work. There are mental health issues that have been cropping up. There's some challenges with people's home work environment, no dedicated space to work for a sustained period of time. And then, of course, childcare, teaching, camp counselors, they're doing all sorts of things. So I think for our population, of digital gurus and creatives, they've definitely made it work. But what we're doing is understanding the costs of what that has been. Without these open spaces, we lose some opportunities for socializing and spontaneity and collaboration naturally. But we're rethinking how we use time and travel and the office space itself. So I think that will very much influence the future of work for us. Again, in the global mobility space, I'll just close by saying it's been much less about physically relocating the employee in our organization to the role and much more about moving the role to the employee. So.
Thank you, Sarah. Scott, do I see you're up there? So do we have a moment just to wrap up?
Well, we need to get on to Lynn, but let me just say that, let me kind of do a closing for you if you don't mind, because I really enjoyed this panel. Again, going back to what Sarah left with in terms of being employee-centric, I think I hear that strategy loud and clear. Cheryl, I love your perspective that ambiguity as a strategy, as a mindset. I think that's spot on right now. And Jack, I'm in total agreement with you. I'm not sure we're more productive in this virtual environment or not. I think, we've got to look hard at this in terms of how we appropriately look at how work is structured. So, Susan, again, thank you so much for bringing this terrific panel on. Again, we want to have you back for another deep dive. Thank you again. Well, let's bring on our closing keynote now. Lynn Shotwell, the President CEO of Worldwide ERC. Again, our long-term partner. Lynn has been with us at many of our sessions over the years. And Lynn, thank you again. We're delighted to have you. And again, for all our panelists, stick around for our final questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. And let me just say how much I've really enjoyed all the presentations today. And I want to congratulate you for bringing us all together. You didn't have us all coordinate our comments beforehand, but I think they flow beautifully together because it sets up for us how do we address this next normal. And there's so many different levels at which we have to think about what does the next normal look like, for employees, for kind of the industry. But the piece that I'm here to talk about today is we can't leave government out of this. I come from a background where I've worked on advocacy for many years. And, government policy never keeps up with the pace of business. And I think what I want to talk about today is how do we seize this opportunity to dream, like you said, Scott, about the future and really drive change out of all this turmoil? And how do we shape this next normal to really meet what we need? So let me just start by giving a brief background on Worldwide ERC and our membership. Our membership is really twofold. On the one hand, it's the corporate talent and mobility professionals, like the last panel, who are moving employees around the globe. And then on the other hand, we have the service providers like Robert and like Michael, who help employees and their families get settled into their new destinations. One of the things that I took over as CEO of Worldwide ERC on March 30th. So it's been quite a time to step into this new world. We were talking about how do you virtually onboard people. Well, I haven't met any of my team in person. We've been figuring out how do we adjust to this new normal. But one of the things we've had to do with our members is really step up and figure out how can we be their voice, how can we represent them in this new world and with policymakers. So I want to start by sharing kind of a story of how I've been thinking about this new normal or the next normal. And I think it starts by recognizing that the previous normal was not always the normal. The world's evolved, it's always evolved, it will always continue to evolve. And I've been thinking a lot over the past year about a story I heard from Guy Ryder, who's the executive, the deputy general of the International Labor Organization in Geneva. And the ILO is a forum where governments, employers, and labor unions come together to think about how do we best structure policies for the world of work. And Guy told the story about the establishment of the 40-hour work week. I think what many of us don't realize is that this was the first victory of the ILO, and it came about just after World War I and just after the last global pandemic, when you had dock workers that were standing on docks day after day, and they never knew if they were going to work 1 hour or 14 hours. And so what they did is they set up this notion that we should have a normal work week of 40 hours with a weekend. So before I think the last couple of years, many of us took this for granted as the normal. But before March, even before the COVID, I was thinking a lot about, well, how does this kind of paradigm apply in the world of gig work, where we were already moving away from what we considered normal. And now I have to think about how do we apply this to our new realities of COVID, unemployment, remote work, and social justice that some of our other panelists have already talked about today. And what I'd say is that, knowing that laws and regulations and that, governments are not going away, they're going to keep legislating, they're going to keep regulating. How do we work effectively with them to shape the next normal that we want? So I have a slide here. Scott, I don't know, my screen is frozen,
Yes,
so I don't know if everybody else can see it. But I'd like to share with you a slide from the World Economic Forum. And I know it's impossible to read that slide. If you can, Scott, if you can move to the next one. But what this is if you go online, you can, to the World Economic Forum, you can start playing around with this really fabulous tool where you click on a particular topic and then it takes you to all of the other topics that are linked to it. So there's a section in here where you can click on COVID-19 workforce impact, and it links us to other topics that we've been talking about today. So it links to corporate culture, to inclusion, to supply chains, to talent, education, and skills. And, then within those topics, you can click further on. But ultimately, many of these links go to what's called multi-stakeholder collaboration. So it's a whole page dedicated to how do we get businesses, governments, labor unions, and civil society to work together to solve the really big challenges confronting us today. And I saw Alice's book in the background talking about how companies are now, the expectation is that companies have to step in and help solve these really big challenges that governments can't. And I think that's true. I think we have a really big role to play in solving them. And what we need from the business community is we need all the voices. We can't just have the voices of the large companies, but we need the voices of small and medium-sized enterprises as well for us to really be effective at identifying, what the global panel problems are, and experimenting with local solutions. I think, gone are the days when we could pass a regulation and have it kind of work for our world for 10 or 15 days. I think we're going to enter into a situation where we have continual evolution and experimentation. So we have global problems. We're going to have to experiment with some local solutions to those, come back, share the learnings, evolve and adapt as things go forward. Now, this is really, if you think about it, this is really different from how we've shaped our world since maybe World War II. At that time, I think the expectation was that governments, from both governments and kind of the public, is that companies would, generate economic growth and new jobs. And that and for the past few decades, we've operated in a paradigm that if governments just kind of step out of the way and minimize regulatory burdens, that businesses will be able to do their jobs. But, frankly, a lot of this happened and was able to happen kind of behind closed doors. And so as, Cheryl was just saying, we need to rebuild trust. And, trust in business, we know that trust in politicians is very low, but trust in businesses is also low. And so we have to figure out, how do we lend our voice and how do we help rebuild trust and shape the next normal as in a manner that we want to see it. So, I think, this whole notion of corporate social responsibility has been burgeoning for, I'd say, the past decade. We've seen consumers and employees who have been demanding of business leaders that they step up and take action on social issues. And even the Business Roundtable here in Washington, which is the group of CEOs from many of the biggest blue chip companies, even last year, they came out and recognized that the purpose of companies is not just about maximizing profits, but that it's building and promoting an economy that serves everyone. So I think several have said this already, that, kind of this pivot that we have to make and that we were already in the process of making is just being accelerated by COVID and by Black Lives Matter and by everything else that's going on in the world. And so we have to step forward and say, how can we as businesses find our voice in this? So, as I've watched and participated in discussions, both in Washington and in Geneva over the past decade, I've been really kind of surprised by how effective small civil society organizations without a lot of money have been at harnessing the new tools that we have, how they've harnessed social media to push forward their agenda, to get people to speak out on it. And I've seen, with some exceptions, that businesses have kind of hung back. And I think this is natural and normal. We want to control the environment. I think most business leaders have not been groomed to either be, policy wonks or to be social justice warriors. And so we're being asked to step into an environment that can be very uncomfortable for us. And so, the biggest companies that have sophisticated government affairs professionals and PR professionals and legal teams, even they have made missteps in this process. I mean, if you just think about it, I think many tried to do the right thing by putting out statements in support of Black Lives Matter. But in some cases, companies have been criticized because their employees come back and say, you know what, you're not really walking the talk. You need to put your money where your mouth is. And so, again, we have to pivot and respond to those very valid concerns. We also saw companies that, took PPP loans. And I think they rightly thought they were doing the right thing, right? Congress was making loans available. It was really unclear who qualified for those loans. And so companies did what they thought was the right thing, which was to apply for these loans to protect their businesses. But then upon public scrutiny, it came out, well, maybe, those organizations didn't really need the money and they ended up giving it back. So this is a world that we all have to figure out how to advocate. And I know that, some leaders get this. We see some CEOs and other leaders who really are speaking out. But I see others who are saying, I don't have time to deal with some of those messes. Why am I going to step into that? But let me suggest that I think we don't have the luxury of putting our heads in the sand on this. I think all of us have to step out and be vocal on these issues in a way that we never have been before. So what I'd like to do is just share with you, a couple of easy ways to do this. And if you have a government affairs team, what I'd suggest, if you work in human resources, if you work in operations, other parts of the business where you've never really paid that much attention or reached out to your government affairs team, the first step is to reach out to them and let them know what the challenges are that you're having and find out where that kind of fits within their agenda. If you don't have a government affairs team, maybe you're a smaller organization, you don't have the luxury of having, PR teams on call, I'd say, let me give you another suggestion for how you can get your voice out. and that's by leveraging your trade and professional associations and your chambers of commerce. Your job as an executive is really not to be a policy expert, but what your job is to be an expert on your business and to bring that forward to others in your community who can help amplify your voice and find solutions. And your trade associations can be this partner in your work. So let me give you a few simple steps for how you can work effectively with your trade associations to help shape what the next normal is. First, I think you need to speak up and tell them what the problems are that you need fixed. Now, these problems could be kind of big and existential and immediate. Your revenue has dried up because no one is moving during the pandemic. Your problem could also be something that's much more long-term and uncertain. So the question of, will governments continue to issue work visas as we enter an era of high unemployment and they seek to reemploy the local labor force? Your problem could also be something that is seemingly small, but if you could just get it fixed, it would help you move your business forward. So it could be something like you can't close home sales during the pandemic because you can't get everybody in the room to sign the mortgage documents that need to sign them. So the three examples I just gave, these are all issues that worldwide ERC's policy forums have grappled with in the past 3 months. And in all those cases, or in most of them, if we don't have members who kind of bring these issues forward to us, then we may not know that these are things that we could help fix. So I think the second thing about, as we look at where the problems are, it's really important to kind of identify what the locales are that are impacted. So some of these efforts and some of the problems are really global. So for example, expatriates everywhere around the world have fallen out of compliance with immigration and tax laws as they either left locations or got stuck in locations due to COVID. It's not possible for almost any organization to go one by one to every government to talk to them about providing relief. So what we've been able to do is, working through the International Organization of Employers, Worldwide ERC was able to reach a number of governments and a number of other business groups from around the world at one time. We brought very particular expertise in our area of business to these general business groups and to the governments, and therefore they were able to kind of work out solutions on a more local basis. We also work at the federal level, and this again, coming back to immigration. Immigration's a federal issue in the United States. And so one of the things we've been doing is teaming up with other business associations, both in the tech industry, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and others, to push back on what we understand are a coming executive order that would severely limit U.S. work visas. So we've been able to get our stories out to say why this would be helpful to actually, and not help restart the economy, but actually could harm our efforts to restart the economy. And then some of the issues are local. And so, for example, on the mortgage example I gave, some states already allowed electronic signatures. So it seemed like a no-brainer to go to other states and say, if you just allowed electronic signatures on these documents, you could get the real estate market moving again. So this, so I think, identify your issues and look and identify where they are. The third thing I'd say is, most of us belong to multiple professional associations, or if we don't, somebody else in our company does. So I'd say, think about how you can connect your associations. At Worldwide ERC, we had members who belonged to the American Moving Association, and they reached out to us and said, you know what, can you sign on to efforts AMA's efforts to provide COVID-specific relief to movers? And we were able to, put our weight behind those efforts as well in Congress. Same thing with the mortgage issue. We were able to partner with the National Association of Realtors. So by combining our voices, we can all be much stronger. I'd say when you go and you take these issues to your trade associations, you don't have to be the expert. Associations have lots of lawyers and consultants and others who are experts in their fields, and they want to help us find solutions. So don't be intimidated that you have a problem but you don't have a solution. Take it forward. It's important that we're all speaking out. And finally, the thing we really do need from you are your facts and your stories and your data. You know, why do you care about this issue? How many people do you employ in a particular city or a congressional district who are impacted by this? It's the stories that really help drive change. And so we can help you, again, trade associations can help you bring these stories forward if you don't have your own government affairs and PR teams that can do this. And, you know, and while the examples I gave really kind of deal with regulatory and legal issues, these same principles apply to social issues. So think about, you know, what's at stake if your employees or consumers don't feel like you're with them on inclusion, equality, justice, or other issues. This can be a lot to think about, but I think I'm excited by the opportunity to shape what the next normal looks like. And I really think what we need are everyone's voices to ensure that it's a next normal that creates a better world that works for everyone. So thank you, Scott, and happy to take questions. Scott, I don't know if you're on mute.
Thanks very much, Lynn. And if we can have all our panelists come back on and join us visually. Thank you. And to our viewers, again, we know this, going into this was something of a new approach. We did put a lot into this in terms of content. So one of the things we'd like to do with you now is just, we'll be sending you a follow-up email later today, and we would like your input, your feedback, and your questions for this panel, and we'll be sending this along to our entire panel staff to respond to you. So in the interest of time, we would like to do an email to you this afternoon. Let us know your comments, let us know your questions, and we'll get that to you. Lynn, Robert, all of you, the panelists, thank you for your contributions today. Any final words of advice from our panels today before we close?
Alice.
Collaborate, collaborate, collaborate.
Absolutely. Well, Lynn, I think you said that in the end, that it's about forming those collaborative networks is going to be absolutely essential as we go forward. Again, we're going to look forward to seeing all of you. This is a series. We're going to continue with this. We'll continue with the virtual, and eventually, Lynn, like you, we'll eventually get back to the in-person events. So I'll just close here. And again, thank you all for your time, energy, passion around this topic. We'll look forward to seeing you over the coming months and year as we work our way through the various crises, but also this tremendous opportunity we all have. I think we're all seeing that. It's just a matter of marshaling our resources, aligning our folks, adapting, and moving forward. But thank you all again for your energy and time today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers to everyone. I'm going to share our next couple of events, and we'll close off from here. Thank you so much.